Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. This is Left Side of the Aisle, and I'm Larry Erickson, your host. And I hope you'll stay with me for the next almost half hour. I've got some things that I want to talk about that I think you should hear about. If you have any reactions to the show, as always, you can email them to me directly. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING @AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be here somewhere a couple of times during the show. You can leave a comment there, or you can get the email address from there. I do ask, as always, if you send me email, to please include something in the subject line, something that makes it clear this is not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I'm terrible at answering email. I also want to, for those of you that care, want to apologize about there not being a show last week. I have come down with asthmatic bronchitis, and it seems to be going around, so it actually made it kind of hard to do a show. But we're going to do the best we can this week to get back on track. So I'm going to try to start, as I always like to. I get two bits of good news to start with. The first is that back on November 20th, which shows you what happens when you miss a week, things get old, but on November 20th, the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals struck down a Wisconsin law that requires abortion providers to have admitting privileges at a local hospital. The court found this an unconstitutional restriction on the right to an abortion. Now, the ruling was not really a surprise, since during oral arguments, the three-judge panel of the court actually peppered the state's attorneys with questions on the matter. One judge, in fact, Richard Posner, went so far as to say that there was no rational basis for the law, that it provided no health benefits for women, and that it was clearly designed to shut down abortion centers, which is precisely correct on all 3 points. Now, the issue could come up before the Supreme Court. Right now, that's not terribly likely because traditionally, the Supreme Court only steps in when there are conflicting rulings at the appellate level and there's a need to resolve the conflict. That doesn't happen here. Besides Wisconsin, 6 other states have had similar laws challenged in court, and the states have lost all 6 of those other times. Especially in the light of the ongoing attack and the largely successful attack on reproductive rights, these small victories, they may be small, but they're still good news. Our other thing was from December 7th. And that's, again, a court thing. In this case, the Supreme Court refused to hear an appeal by gun nuts who were looking to overturn a city's gun control ordinance. The law in question was enacted by Highland Park, Illinois. This is a suburb of Chicago. They did this in 2013, and the law bans certain semi-automatic weapons, including well-known ones such as the AK-47 and the AR-15, as well as gun magazines that contain more than 10 bullets. Back in April, the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld that ruling, held that law, and because the Supreme Court has refused to hear the appeal, that law will now remain in force. 2 members of the Supreme Court, actually, Justices Clarabelle Thomas and Antonin Skeletor, said that the justice should have taken the case. Thomas claimed the fact that semi-automatic rifles are popular is all that's required for them to be exempt from such restrictions as were in this law. And by not taking the case, the Supreme Court was, quoting him, relegating the Second Amendment to a second-class right. Now, Clarabelle here once opined that several years ago that guards who hogtied an inmate on the floor and beat him to the point where he had loosened teeth, facial bruises, and a cracked dental plate had not engaged in any cruel and unusual punishment. If only Justice Thomas was as concerned with the other amendments as he is with the second. All right, as long as the subject of guns is up, let's go to one of our occasional features. It's called the Hero Award, and it's given as the occasion arises to someone who just does the right thing on a matter big or small. In this case, it is a big thing, and our hero isn't a person. It's actually a newspaper, or to be exact, the editors of the newspaper. And you could, in a way, consider it our first double award because there are two things here. The paper is the New York Daily News. And the first award, first part of the award, is for this. This is the paper's front page from December 3rd, the day after the mass murder at the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino, California. That came on December 2nd. And the headline, as you can clearly see, calls out in no uncertain terms the cowards who hide behind platitudes about our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims without ever actually doing anything about the kind of weapons that caused the massacre in the first place. The second part of this is the paper followed up the next day with this front page. Now, the picture is that of Saud Farouk. He is the person who, together with his wife, Tashfeen Malik, carried out the massacre in San Bernardino. He's a terrorist, it says, as you can see. But since you probably can't really make out the rest, I'm going to read it to you. Below that big headline, it says down the bottom, but so are these guys. That he's a terrorist, but so are these guys. And pictured are Robert Deere, who shot up a Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado Springs on November 27th. Dylan Roof, who murdered, I think it was 8 people in a church in Charleston, South Carolina in June. Adam Lanza, the Newtown school shooter back in 2012. And James Holmes, who perpetrated the attack on a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, also in 2012. What really nailed the award was the last photo, which is headlined, "And This Guy." It's a photo of Wayne LaPierre, the director of the Nutsoid Rabbit Brains of America, the NRA. You know, I don't know a lot about the Daily News' overall editorial policies. I do know when I was living in New Jersey that the Daily News was the conservative paper in New York City, and believe it or not, the New York Post was the liberal one. Maybe the paper's still conservative, I really don't know. But I do know on this topic, on the topic of guns, the Daily News, and not for the first time, is a hero. All right, let's stay on the topic of guns and switch over to one of our regular weekly features. It's the Clown Award, given as always for an act of meritorious stupidity, and oh my, do we have a winner this time. So the big red nose this week goes to the man who was once the Gopper's great Latino hope, Marco Rubio. To explain why, you need a little background here. Because one of the bizarre aspects of our laws about guns, which I really shouldn't say, I suppose, because at this point none of these laws seem bizarre to me, but the fact is, if you are on the no-fly list, because you are, it would mean you are at least supposedly, you are a suspected terrorist. If you're on the no-fly list, you can't get on a plane. But you can buy a gun. Being on the no-fly list is no hindrance. So there was a move in the Senate to say that if you're on the no-fly list, then you can't buy a gun. And this move lost, of course, because enough of these bozos, despite all their blathering about security, are actually more afraid of the NRA than they are of terrorists or terrorism. But when Rubio was asked on one of these Sunday morning talk shows why he voted against it, he said it's because it would impede too many law-abiding citizens from purchasing a gun. The list, and I'm quoting him here, shouldn't be used as a tool to impede 700,000 Americans or potential Americans, people on that list, from having access to be able to fully utilize their Second Amendment rights. Because, he said, you see, the lists are imperfect, and in fact, the majority of people on the list, he said, shouldn't be on them. Now, I have no idea where the 700,000 figure came from. I don't know if that's supposed to be the total number of people on no-fly lists or if it's supposed to represent the majority, supposedly, who shouldn't be on them. But what I can't help notice is that Rubio here makes no reference to cleaning up the list, no reference to providing people who are on the list wrongly a way to get off the list. No, he just thinks that that means that we have to continue to allow suspected terrorists to buy guns because, you know, guns. But you know something? That isn't even what really got him the award. this is. Being interviewed on Faux News after the San Bernardino massacre, Rubio sneered about the left talking about gun control and said Farouk and Malik, quote, put bombs and left bombs behind on the scene of attack, unquote. Here it comes. I don't hear anybody talking about bomb control. Maybe that's because bombs are already illegal, you moth-brained twit. Say what you want about him. The one thing you can't deny, Marco Rubio is a clown. And still talking about guns, we're going to go to our other regular weekly feature. This is the Outrage of the Week. I hope you recall the name Tamir Rice. He was the child shot and killed by Cleveland cop Timothy Lehman in November 2014. The video of the event, which I'm sure you've seen, showed Lehman and his partner, Frank Garmbach, skidding up to Tamir in their patrol car, at which point Lehman jumps out and shoots Tamir in the stomach. Totally elapsed time, 2 seconds. Literally. The two cops then stood around offering no aid while Tamir Rice lay on the ground bleeding. The Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office has claimed that it is and has been aggressively investigating the murder, but it's become more and more clear that what they're really interested in is finding a way to let Lehman walk. The first hard proof was the so-called investigation itself, which dragged out month after month with no progress even after a judge found that there was probable cause for charges to be issued. As columnist Sean King wrote, quoting, nobody in their right mind actually believes it takes this long to investigate a shooting which was caught on film and every piece of evidence and every witness is widely known. More proof of the actual intention came in October when prosecutors released statements from two ostensible experts in police shootings, both of who let Lehman off the hook by saying the shooting was reasonable because the only thing that mattered, they said, was if the cop just thought, that there was a threat, and that Lehman did think that there was such a threat, a conclusion that they reached without ever talking to Lehman or Garmbach. Now, to show you just how shallow this analysis is, other experts hired by the Rice family not only reached the opposite conclusion, they shredded a key argument of the prosecutor's agents, who had claimed that the fact that the cops put themselves in danger, that the cops, by their reckless actions, created the very danger they said that they were responding to, they said that was irrelevant. But in fact, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers Ohio, had previously ruled that, quoting, where a police officer unreasonably places himself in harm's way, his use of deadly force may be deemed excessive. In other words, the cop's reckless behavior is relevant to the question of whether or not a shooting was reasonable. The prosecutors' hand-picked experts didn't know what they were talking about. And at this point, it'll be interesting to see what expert testimony actually gets presented to the grand jury. All right, now, what brought this all up again, right now, we now have the release of the statements by the two cops themselves. Both of them, no surprise, emphasizing how much danger they thought they were in, how Tamir was pulling the gun out of his waistband, how they repeatedly shouted, show us your hands, but he didn't listen, and how Lehman said he aimed for Tamir's hands when he shot, but somehow, despite being at virtual point-blank range, managed to hit him in the stomach instead, and how this and how that and how the other and so forth and so on. Now, leaving aside the question of how they could have repeatedly shouted anything at all in the 2 seconds that this took place in, what most struck me was the fact that the statements are unsworn and they, more significantly, were signed and dated November 30th, 2015, more than a full year after Tamir Rice was killed. It took prosecutors more than a year just to get a statement from the cop who pulled the trigger and his partner who was the only other witness. Now, if what the prosecutors have done is adds up to anything that sounds like a serious investigation to you, if it sounds like anything other than a whitewash to you, if it sounds like anything other than trying to lay the groundwork for letting another killer cop walk, then this must be a very happy time of year for you, because you must still believe in Santa Claus. Me, I don't believe in Santa Claus, except maybe for the Santa Claus that the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office is trying to be for Timothy Lehman. What I do believe is that this is an outrage, and we are taking a break. And we're back. Something I want to do just quick, just because I wanted to do it, and just so that we don't forget, I have a couple of reminders of the fact that most rich people and most big corporations, not all by any means, but most, are self-serving scumbags. Got three things. Chronologically, we're going to take them. First is that there's a new rule to combat water pollution by expanding the coverage of the Clean Water Act to wetlands and streams. That actually got finalized. This rule got finalized this year. And of course, a lot of corporations want to see it overturned. Now, Obama pledged to veto any congressional attempt to overturn the regulation, so trying to insert it into the omnibus budget bill, which is being debated even as I do this, that would have attracted a lot of attention. And note I say, would have. The right-wing dominated Congress is expected to include a provision to block Syrian refugees from coming into the United States. In a conference called the week before Thanksgiving, lobbyists representing a number of polluting industries, such as the electric utilities, the American Forest and Paper Association, and others, agreed among themselves that the blocking of Syrian refugees, is great news for them. Why? Because this issue takes the focus off them, giving them the cover they need to attach a legislative rider under the radar in order to reverse the new rules. So up to 10,000 refugees hoping to escape the violence and insanity of the Syrian civil war and resettle in the United States. Their hopes being slammed against brick walls by the xenophobic religious bigots, attacking them as mere conduits for terrorists, if not terrorists themselves. And the only thing these people on this call can think about is how it helps them continue to be able to pollute wetlands and streams. Yeah, scumbags. All right, next up, you certainly remember Martin Shkreli, the smirking little prig of a man who raised the price of a drug used by HIV patients and others to fight a parasitic infection. He raised the price by 5,000% to some $750 per pill. After a massive outcry, he said he reduced the price. You may remember this. Here's the thing. He hasn't recut the price, and he's not going to. The day before Thanksgiving, his company announced that it would drop prices for hospitals, create smaller bottles with 30 pills, and give free starter packs in 2016. The problem here? These discounts only apply to bulk orders. The list price for the drug remains the same, $750 a pill. And Martin Shkreli remains a smirky little prig and a scumbag. And last but by no means least, and what actually prompted me to do this, you unquestionably heard all of the raucous fawning over Mark Zuckerberg, the mega-billionaire co-founder of Facebook, when he and his wife announced that they would donate 99% of their net worth, the vast majority of which is now tied up in Facebook shares valued at about $45 billion. Contrary to what you likely heard, they did not donate $45 billion to charity, not even close. What Zuckerberg and his wife, whose name is Priscilla Chan, did, they set up a limited liability company, one which he controls, and donated the shares to that company. In effect, Zuckerberg moved his wealth from one pocket to the other. Now, if they had set up a charitable foundation, it would have been subject to rules, to regulations, to oversight. It would have to donate to charity a certain portion of its assets every year. There are transparency requirements. An LLC need do none of that. It can invest in for-profit companies, can make political donations, lobby for changes in the law. In short, Zuckerberg can do anything he wants with his money exactly the way he did before. But this does have wonderful tax benefits for Mark Zuckerberg. Now, simply put, what happens is that the LLC donates shares, appreciated shares, to charity. That is, actually donates because remember, that's what its assets are, shares in Facebook, and it donates shares to charity. He gets a tax deduction for the fair market value, of the shares, but there's no tax because the shares are donated, not sold. Bottom line, what this means is that Mark Zuckerberg has amassed a fortune valued at $45 billion and may never pay a single penny in tax on it. Yes, this is all legal, but that doesn't make it any less scummy, especially when, as part of this, Zuckerberg allows himself to be described as a great philanthropist who gave away his fortune. He would better be described as a scumbag. All right, moving on from there to something else. I have to tell you that Marco Rubio actually had some serious competition for the Clown Award this week in the form of Nevada State Assemblywoman Michelle Fiore, whose Christmas card this year consisted of a photo of her extended family, all dressed in blue jeans and red shirts, and all of them, except for babes in arms and including a small child, carrying guns for her Christmas card. Because, what would Jesus do? But she lost out the Clown Award because of something on a recent episode of a radio show. Now, this Major League Intelligence earlier this year described cancer as a fungus that could be flushed out with salt water and baking soda. But recently on her radio show, she described a conversation with a Nevada Gopper political consultant who asked her why she hadn't signed on to a statement calling for opposing resettling of any Syrian refugees in Nevada. She quoted herself as telling the consultant, "Are you kidding me? I'm about to fly to Paris and shoot him in the head myself." She then went on her show and said, "I am not okay with Syrian refugees. I'm not okay with terrorists. I'm okay with putting them down, blocking them out. Just put a piece of brass in their ocular cavity and end their miserable life. I'm good with that." Okay, that's not clownish. That's subhuman. However, this does raise one thing that I wanted to talk about. I won't really have time this week, unfortunately, because of something else that I really want to get to. But I will say this briefly, that this relates to the issue of something I've talked about several times before, the commons, the concept of the commons. That concept, is, as I refer to it, is the idea of a shared societal space, that range of our social and political culture where our common interests lie. It's the idea of what makes us a society instead of a collection of atomized individuals separated from and in competition with all the other atomized individuals. The idea that there is a public sphere in which all can participate, that all have a stake, all have a part, and all have responsibility, each to the other and to the whole. It's kind of like the idea of a town square. For us as Americans, we could perhaps sum up the concept in the phrase, "we the people." And I deeply fear that our sense of the commons, our sense of we the people, which has already been under continuing attack from the right wing, looking to advance its own power and position by cutting people out from that common society, that our sense of the commons is now being shredded by the sort of paranoid religious hatred and bigotry and bedwetting xenophobia, which that same right wing did know it was advancing, and of which Michelle Fiore is just one isolated example. What the reactionaries in this country have released and spawned in their pursuit of greater power, and what they foolishly imagine they can still control, is a danger to our survival, not as individuals, but as a society. Because societies which lose their sense, whatever it is for that society, societies that lose their sense of the commons very often fragment and can even descend into civil war as parts of that society come to regard other parts of that same society as other, as not us, which is in fact exactly what is happening. I have said a number of times that sometimes I don't regret the fact that I will not live to see the world I see coming. Right now, my fear is that I will live to see that world. My consolation is the fact that we have been here before. In fact, it has been worse before, and those who exploit bigoted fears are actually reading from a very old playbook. We have survived before. Hopefully we will again. And the best thing we can actually do is just carry on, because like it said in the movie, never give up, never surrender. I'm sure I'm going to go on more about this, particularly how the media addresses Islamic terrorism as compared to right-wing white Christian male terrorism, which the FBI says is the source of most domestic terrorism in the United States. But I'm going to have to leave it aside for now, because while I was preparing the show, something came up which I decided could not wait a week to get addressed. The University of Texas admits 3/4 of its students each year under a so-called race-blind program, where the students in the top 10% of their local high school get automatic acceptance. The other quarter are accepted through a holistic review that includes race as one factor among many. And of course, some self-important white kid who wasn't in the top 10% of her local high school and didn't get in through the other program decided it was just so totally unfair that some black kid got in when she couldn't, and so claimed that any consideration of race is just horribly unfair and mean and rotten and stuff. All right, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the university's program. That was in 2013. The Supreme Court said the appeals court should have considered the program under a stricter legal standard. The Court of Appeals did in 2014 and upheld it again. So now it's back before the Supreme Court, and oral arguments were held on December 9th. During those arguments, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Skeletor advanced the argument that affirmative action was hurting minority students by getting them into University of Texas where, quote, they do not do well, unquote. Better, he said, for them to go to a less advanced school, a slower track school where they do well, where they do not feel that they're being pushed ahead in classes that are too fast for them. Now, the pauses which are in the transcript are significant because I think that they clearly indicate that Skeletor caught himself before he said what he really meant to say, which is that African American students just aren't bright enough to go to a top flight school, because I can't see any other way to understand his statements. Former U.S. Solicitor General Gregory Garr, who is now representing the University of Texas, tried to refute Skeletor, but Skeletor just plowed ahead by saying that most black scientists in this country don't come from places like University of Texas. They come from lesser schools. Now, that may well be true, and it's probably true of most white scientists in the country too, but of course that doesn't matter to Skeletor. Neither is diversity a matter to Skeletor. What matters to him is to put an end to affirmative action programs, even ones as small and limited as this one. And now it's clear why he thinks that affirmative action programs are pointless. He just thinks that, as a whole, black folks just ain't as smart as white folks. What an amazing pig of a man he is. That's it for this week. We're out of here. We will see you back next week. And in the meantime, you have the best week you possibly can. And as always, peace.